Well, kia ora tātou. We'll get started. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really pleased to see you, and we just want to begin with a karakia to set the meeting in motion. Whakataka tahau ki te uru. Sorry, I have it here to share, but I can't get it going now. Whakatahau ki te uru, whakatahau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei Māori ora. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to Kai Korero, our ANZEA monthly. At the moment, we're trying to get them in the middle of each session, in the middle of each month. So welcome along. We have a real treat for you today. But first of all, just to introduce myself, I'm Ruth Pritchard. I'm on the ANZEA board. And I work at Te Ihuaka. It's part of the Education Review Office. And I just want to introduce Karen, who will be monitoring the chat. So Karen, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Ruth, called Karen Bissell toku ingoa. I work 4 days a week for the National Public Health Service, and I'm in the evidence team there, which is part of the Intelligence Directorate. And we do some evaluation enabling functions for the Intelligence Directorate and for other parts of National Public Health Service. And 1 day a week, I'm at the School of Population Health at the University of Auckland, and namely teaching the 705 postgraduate course on program evaluation. And I'm also a board member of ANZEA. My role today is to monitor the chat. We're going to pause at the end of Juvena's presentation and mainly manage the questions that you might have, comments you have at that stage. And we'll probably end up with a combination of me methodically going through the questions you've put in the chat on the way through, as well as taking some questions that you might like to ask live by putting your hand up, and have a mixture of approaches. Right, back over to you, Ruth.
Kia ora. So our special treat today is to hear from Juvena Jalal. Juvena works alongside me here at Te Ihuaka, which is probably one reason why she's appearing today, because she had a bit of a, arm twist. And a lot of people in our survey, our ANZEA survey, actually wanted to know a little bit more about how to work with stakeholders such as disability in the disability space. And I thought, well, Juvena has done this amazing piece of work and worked really closely with Waikaha. So I thought she would love to hear from her. She's got a great little presentation. And as you've seen in her bio, I hope she's got extensive experience across education, but she's also had a lot to do with working with special educational needs in the sector. She's worked at all levels of education, tertiary, secondary, primary and ECE. So there's not many people that have worked with that breadth. I'll just remind you to keep your mutes on until the presentation is over. Kia ora. Thanks very much. Juvena.
Yeah. Good. Ko Juvena Jalal Takoingoa. I am, as Ruth said in her very kind intro, one of the senior education evaluators at Te Ihuaka, the Education Evaluation Centre. I'm wondering if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And as Ruth mentioned, there might have been a little bit of arm twisting involved, but it wasn't much. I was more than happy to have this conversation. This is a project that's very dear to my heart. And I would also like to begin by acknowledging the collaboration that went on in this project and the two senior evaluators then also at Te Waka who are joining in for this today. So big thank you, Mihi, to Maylin Harley and to Tess Livingston, who were both part of this project. So it was an absolute joy and pleasure to work with both of you. And today to share this is acknowledging all the work that we did together on this. So to begin with, I think what I'd probably preface by saying is that this was a project that happened a couple of years ago. So we published it, I think, in 2022. And so this is a sort of retrospective hindsight, looking at, reflecting on what that journey was like, but also a bit of things that have happened since, which is quite interesting. And so as we go through the presentation, I'll share a bit more about that. Now, let me see if my technical skills are up to par, and hopefully you can see my screen. Yeah, cool, awesome. Thank you. Cool. So as I mentioned, this was a project that the Education Evaluation Centre, which is a part of the Education Review Office, undertook. It is really, I think, for me, I've been with the Te Waka for about 4.5 years now. In terms of projects, it was perhaps one of the projects that really told the story of partnership across evaluation and in all phases of it, the process of it. I will try and move this along. Will it work? Hang on. Let's see. I wonder. Yeah, there you go. I've got it. Right. So the plan for the next 20 minutes or so is for me to share a bit about the context of the evaluation, how we brought people together, how we amplified voices, and the impact that we had. And then we'll hopefully get into some really good discussion. Right. So in terms of the context of the project, this was a project we partnered with the Human Rights Commission. And at that point, when we started the project, it was the Office of Disability Issues. As we journeyed through the project, the Waikaha was established, and so the Office of Disability Issues became part of Waikaha during the course of that project. I think the partnership was quite unique in terms of the expertise, the opportunity to access expertise across agencies became available, and the opportunity to have at our steering group a guidance that was across those agencies. I think one of the biggest learnings, perhaps, from that project was just being able to define the term disabled learners became a big learning for all of us. And while we had partnered with Human Rights Commission and Office of Disability Issues, and we're obviously looking at UNCRPD guidance to frame our understanding and how we use terminology. And so disabled learners for us as the project team was very much rooted within the Article of 24 of UNCRPD, which provides a social model for disability. And I think one of our biggest learnings right at the start of the project was understanding that different sectors have different models that they're still operating within when it comes to defining disability. And we had the medical model, we had the sort of ableist models. Education sector particularly was using terminology that did not use disabled because I think the framing from where they were looking at disabled at the start of the project was about the learner being disabled, whereas within the UN CRPD framework, disabled learners are disabled by the context and the environment. And so that was something that was perhaps our biggest learning as setting up the project was we would come across this at every point of interaction, depending on who we were interacting with and what model they were carrying in their work environment. So that was one of the first sort of context pieces for this project. We had key evaluation questions that we wanted to answer. We wanted to understand how well disabled learners were doing. We wanted to understand the quality and the inclusiveness of education provision. We wanted to understand what the system enablers were and how inclusive and how supportive they were for inclusive education. And what were the actions that could lead to improved outcomes? So we wanted to hear what would create change, what would lead to better outcomes. Right through all phases of the evaluation, we were very mindful about highlighting the voice of the disabled learners and their whānau. We were framing it in the context of nothing without us, for us. And being able to do that effectively, we needed to make sure that at each stage of the project, we had partnership that supported and enabled us to do it. Whether it was in our steering group, whether it was in our expert advisory group, our working groups, at all stages of the project, while we were designing our tools, we were designing our questions, when we were looking at how we would analyze, who we would sense check the analysis with, at all of those phases, it was really important for us to make sure that lived experience was valued and that was incorporated in our understanding of the data that we were gathering. We also realized that we were using data to impact people's hearts and minds, and that it was something that required us to bring people along on a journey. As I mentioned earlier, just the word disabled learner could for some people be a trigger. And so being able to unpack and understand what was causing that and being able to respond to it and explain our position and where we were coming from. Having partnered with the Office of Disability Issues, we had the absolute wonderful, generous support of Pauline Melham, who was available for us to be at these conversations, to be able to explain from her lived experience perspective as well why we would use those terms and what would it mean when we were using it with learners and parents. There was an opportunity to bring the people in the education sector who we were meeting with and working with on that journey as well. So I think there was both a knowledge shift that was happening as a result of the evaluation setup itself, as well as a change of heart and perspectives. Embedded within it were a lot of things that we had to unpack for ourselves as an evaluation team. And so one of the things we had to do was quite an intensive onboarding session so that the entire team that would be gathering the data was part of that unpacking and understanding process for themselves, wherever they were at in their journey and their understanding, they had to then build that understanding before getting into the field, before having those conversations. We were very mindful that we wanted to have conversations with disabled learners who may not be able to speak, who may need to use devices, who may need the support of a sign language interpreter. And those were some of the thoughts that we gave to how we would set that up, how we would enable that. We also, because it was a mixed method project, we also had a quantitative data that we were gathering through surveys. We were very mindful of how challenging a digital survey platform can be for some of the disabled learner population that we were trying to reach out to. And so one of the earlier decisions that was made was to consider a partnered approach, that we would look at the parent and the learner as a unit, and that it would enable the parent on behalf of the learner, with the learner, fill out the response. And so it wasn't seen as a separate response, it was seen as a whole unit response. And we were guided by Maori academic on our EAG on this, some of the work that they had done in the space, disabled Maori key informant who guided us on this process, who talked about the fact that it is a whole whānau experience of disability, and therefore it would be more appropriate to do it as a collective in terms of understanding what the challenges are. And so that was one of the ways in which we made sure that there was accessibility to the survey responses, even though it was still in a digital platform, but that it was facilitated through a parent or caregiver. In terms of our interviews, this was obviously just post-COVID, and so we were mindful that obviously there was the added element of making sure that we weren't having contact, physical contact, so all our interviews were online. But again, in the interviews, the request that we sent out was for parents to facilitate the interview conversation with the learner present. And we had some learners who did not require parent facilitation, but there were some who did and who needed to use their own digital device to have that conversation with us. And at all of those interviews, we had Pauline and myself present. And so it enabled us to bring together our strengths in order to facilitate those conversations with disabled learners and their whānau. I think what perhaps was at the core of the entire evaluation was the way in which we were working. I think respectful partnerships were at the heart of the work. We had to begin the journey by acknowledging our unconscious bias of ableism and the language that we were using within our tools. We had to constantly question. We had to question our unconscious bias when it came to how we set up the discussions, how we perhaps, and this is an interesting one where sometimes the unconscious bias can go to the other extreme where you privilege a particular view. And so this view that it would need extra facilitation, extra support, all of that, again, is a product of our unconscious ableist bias. And so being on that journey with someone who had the lived experience was an absolute learning opportunity for all of us, but also particularly for me to understand that my ableist bias perhaps felt that all these supports needed to be in place, whereas having Pauline with me, who was a capable supporter of the interviews, but she would sort of go, but you don't need that support here. So being able to be guided and checked and pulled back and pulled up on my bias was a real privilege and a real learning opportunity, to constantly check the biases that we carry. I think the combining of expertise was particularly helpful when it came to the analysis and being able to unpack what we had heard from disabled learners from our surveys, as well as from our interviews and conversations. We realized that we needed the perspective of those who'd been through this journey. And we were very fortunate to be able to facilitate a focus group conversation of sense making with young people who identify as disabled, who had just recently exited the schooling system. And so therefore, that opportunity to bounce off what we were hearing and test our findings with them was, again, one of those absolute privileges of being able to not just assume, but test it with those who've just experienced the education system. We began to realize that we had started to have an impact even before the evaluation had been completed. And I think this was one of the unique projects where we could almost see it happening. It was happening for us as individuals, as the team, as the ihuwaka, but it was also happening with any one of the groups we were having conversations with. So one of the most fascinating sort of things that spiraled off was the effect that the evaluation started happening as we asked questions. We asked particular agencies to provide us with data on disabled learners. And as we put in those requests, those agencies got back to us saying, we actually don't have a way of defining disabled learners, and therefore will struggle to give that data to you. So how about we have a conversation about how we define it with you, and then give you the data you need. And so in a way, we started the ball rolling for what has now become independent work streams and pieces of work in these agencies in order for them to have greater visibility of the data for disabled learners, in order for them to report on it. In a couple of these agencies now, it's a work stream that we're still in touch with. It's a conversation that's now led to 2 years down the track, still having follow-up conversations about how do we take this forward? How do we report this? Have we got this right? So it's been one of those projects, I think, where the connections that we built with agencies as a result of starting this evaluation have continued. So there is the Disability Data and Evidence Group that was set up by the Office of Disability Issues when we started the project. And we joined that as the evaluation team, and I've continued to stay in touch with them, and through that have added on other agencies that we worked with who were not part of that group and who have now, as a result of this conversation and the evaluation, have joined that interagency group. So a lot of that spin-off still is happening. It's a sort of a snowball effect of people beginning to think about disabled learners from the perspective of their agency and the work that they do. We worked quite closely with Teaching Council quite recently. This was a conversation that, again, was when we looked at what guidance is there for teachers when they're working, when they're being asked to teach in an inclusive way, and how they teach disabled learners in their settings. And that led to Teaching Council sort of beginning their work stream on this. And I'm very pleased to announce that only recently, a couple of weeks ago, they have launched their tool, their guidance for teachers, specifically for working with disabled learners. So I think those were some of those effects that this evaluation started to generate as it was happening. A lot of the schools, and I think Tess will vouch for this, had, the initial conversations that we started having with the schools was, we don't use the term disabled learners. And so starting from that point, but then having conversations about accessibility, about how accessible is the physical environment and how accessible is the learning that's happening within the classroom. That became a trigger for a lot of the schools beginning to think, the leaders, the teachers beginning to think about their classroom in a different way. So I think that's the whole sort of evaluation process impact that we often don't measure. But that's the one that sticks in my mind as one of the most impactful projects that was beginning to have an impact as we were gathering data. I think this is probably where I would say that it summarizes how the project was done in partnership with the different agencies, with disability groups. And the gift we got at the end of the project was this young person who wrote a poem for us, who wrote this beautiful poem and sent it to us and wanted us to include it in our report. I think if this doesn't touch policymakers' hearts, I don't know what will. I think this is where our data, our graphs, become real. This helps us put into perspective what it really means for disabled learners as they journey through the education system. It was an absolute privilege to be able to receive this gift, to be trusted with it, and to respect it and have it as part of our evaluation report opening page. I think this, for me, symbolized that we had perhaps had a good go at what respectful partnership could be right through an evaluation process. There was a lot of learning. There continues to be a lot of learning, but I think it was the beginning of a process that opened us to understanding what an inclusive evaluation could be and could look like. I think I am about at the end of the time that I have. I think, again, acknowledging those who enabled this to happen, acknowledging the team that worked really beautifully together, acknowledging all the people that we could chat with through the different channels, and who shared openly, who shared their challenges, who shared their successes with us wholeheartedly. So really acknowledging that this wouldn't have happened without them. I've also added a link to our report. So if you'd like to see the full report, read the full report, the link's right there. So, right, that's the end of my bit. I will stop screen sharing. And hand it over to Ruth.
Thank you, Juvena. That was fascinating. Even though I knew about this project, I was still learning. So thank you very much. Before we hand over to Karen to field your questions, I just thought it would be useful for you to post that link now into the chat while we get started. Would that, or would you like me to do that?
I can do that.
Yeah, thank you. Karen.
Oh, thank you very much, Juvena. That there was, I think everybody was transfixed and just listening to you, because we haven't had the chat has been quiet. I think you just gave us a lovely story, told a lovely story there of each part of the process you'd gone through, and I was struck on the way through by how many times you talked about important conversations, so that the evaluation process was a very important means for brokering conversations. Yeah, very interesting on a lot of levels. Now, we do have a question from Amy, who would like to hear more about the interview, how you interviewed. So maybe some more about the methods. Amy's question is, what was the main interview method that you used?
Right. So we set up online Zoom interviews, a bit like this, but it was done with Pauline and myself. And the invitation, before we did the interview, we had a conversation with the caregiver or the parent to identify if we needed someone for sign language interpretation, if we needed to have any additional device available. We had trialed a board with images that could be used for nonverbal learners. Most of them preferred using their own tools that they are comfortable using. And so we gave them the opportunity to bring that up and bring it with them. And so it was a very responsive and flexible way of interviewing. We were very fortunate that in our onboarding session, we had a whānau, parents and a young learner who offered to share with us what would work for them when we were setting up our process. And as we were having that conversation, we realized that this young person would move away from the screen, but was still hearing us, and then would come back and pop in a word and then go away. And then, so what the parents then told us is keep it going. Just because they've moved away doesn't mean they're not listening, doesn't mean that they're not telling, they won't tell you what they want to tell you. And that was so true, because when we actually got into the field with our interviews, that happened with 2 learners who identify as nonverbal neurodiverse, who moved away repeatedly, but the parent kept chatting with us. But then when they heard something that they wanted to contribute towards or add to, they came along. One of the young learners did not say anything right through the whole interview, but at the end whispered to their mum what they wanted their mum to tell us. And so being open to all of that, including obviously students who wanted to use their own device, and very young 8-year-old who had just learned to use her talking device, who gave it a go in the interview with us. So just being open to trying different things, I think, was our big takeaway.
Thank you, Juvena. Have we got anybody who'd like to put their hand up and ask a question? We're a group, we're not too large, so it would be lovely to hear some voices as well. Lee's got a question.
Kia ora. Thank you. That was fascinating. What a great piece of work. It was really interesting listening to your process and how you worked through all of that. We're sort of facing some similar things to think about ourselves, and really keen to know whether there's any kind of monitoring post-evaluation, because there's going to be a lot of impact from the work that you've done here that's not going to be visible immediately during and straight after the evaluation. So how are you going to measure that ongoing impact, and whether you thought about that? And if you haven't, that's okay. What advice would you offer for thinking about ongoing monitoring of such evaluations?
I think we've had, as a centre, as an evaluation centre, we've had conversations about how we monitor the impact of our evaluations. And so we've obviously got things that we monitor now, like how many people click open the report and read it, and sort of, accessing that kind of, and getting so I'm expecting a spike in this report happening post this. But apart from that, I think we did not really have a sort of process by which we could keep track. So it's not a defined process, but because this evaluation has led to other agencies still keeping in touch with us, it's been one of those that's been in our radar, where we know that it keeps sort of having an impact that we hadn't expected. And so but I think that's probably something for us to take back and think about as the evaluation center, understanding how we track not just the digital monitoring that's easier to do, but more about that sort of how do we pool where the impact is. I think obviously one of the things we do is post-evaluation, we send out a survey to people. But again, that doesn't necessarily capture the groups where the impact actually might be happening at a different level. So I hope that answers your question.
No, thank you. That's really useful.
Juvena, we've got a question from the chat. Somebody who'd like to learn more about the sense-making process with the youth. So could you tell us more about how you did the sense-making?
Sure. I'll give it a go. I know Maylin's in there, so Maylin, feel free to jump in and add if you can, if you feel like it. So what we essentially did was identified the group that would be able to support us most with that sense-making process. We had also by then done a bit of the analysis ourselves to be able to get to the sort of emerging findings that we wanted to test. And being able to take some of those emerging findings to the group to sense check perhaps was the best way for them to share their experience, but also to then hear what the emerging findings were and tell us a bit more about. So one of the examples that sticks in my mind is this young person who told us about how she wanted to study to be a CA, and she wanted to do statistics and maths, and how the school had actually felt that she would perhaps not do well in it, and had made a decision on her behalf to not offer her those subjects in high school, and how she then had to advocate quite strongly to be considered. And so this idea that that some of that higher education options sometimes get chosen for disabled learners with well-intending school leaders, but not in consultation with them or with their aspirations, or with fear that they will try it and experience stress or challenge, and therefore we will save them from experiencing that and not offer that pathway. So I think that was really helpful, because we had definitely heard that come through quite strongly, where there was a pre-selection of pathways almost happening. And so that was really good to sense check and to hear this young person's perspective. And she talked about how strongly she had to advocate to counter it. So yeah, that was perhaps the setting within which that sense-making session was done.
Juvena, I noticed Maylin is tuned in. Did you want to add anything to that? around gathering the a sense checking with the young people. No, it's all right.
Hi. No, I wasn't going to add into that point, but at a good point, I was going to also say it's wonderful listening to Juvena reflect and pull out the insights from that very huge, intense piece of work. Yeah. And reflecting back, it's been a couple of years now, and I've moved on. But it's good to see you and Tess carry the good work on with schools. But I was just going to contribute one point from a project management perspective, and then Tess would probably want to chime in too. That I think this was a huge piece of work with so many stakeholders. I think we had the expert advisory group, which kept us on our toes. We had an internal, and then we had a steering group with the bosses of the ERO, Human Rights Commission, and Whaikaha, which also kept us on our toes. There was a lot of, and I think what worked really well was we had very clear roles between us, our team. We had one person focused on managing timelines, delivery, and the very frequent reporting back to the steering groups and advisory groups. We had, I think you focused, Juvena, on looking after the relationship with families and students and possibly the partnership with Whaikaha, and Tess looking at the relationship with schools. So I think that really helped it. That was a critical part to the success of making sure there was minimizing the blind spots,
roles,
because there was a lot of risks. There was a lot of risks that we had to manage. Yeah.
Kia ora. Thank you.
The science. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Millet.
Juvena, Lee's pointed out that there were a couple of other reports that you mentioned, and I think it was the Teaching Council guidance for teachers that you mentioned that's been recently launched. Is that something that we could have in the chat? I don't know, Ruth, have you got a link for that, or if we could put that in?
I can have a look. I am not sure how public it is yet.
Right, may not be.
I can double check and send it through to you for distribution if it is, but I could just quickly check while.
Yeah, I think that's something we can follow up with, just to make sure the status of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is in the meantime another question for you, Juvena. So we'll relieve you of your Googling task there. Did you include ethnicity, and how did the Pacific participants interact and respond to the interview, if there were any? Interesting. This person is interested to learn of things that we need to be aware of.
Yep. So we definitely had Pacific and Maori disabled learners as subgroups of learners within our disabled learner population, who we wanted to particularly tweak our tools and our way of engagement. We had our Pacific Fono Pule Pacifica providing her guidance and support in helping us do that. We also had Pacific colleagues who supported and facilitated those interviews and online conversations with Pacific families and their young people. It helped us both with the sense making, but also with how to frame the questions. They helped us understand the different contexts and the element of where they might be in terms of using the term disabled within their community. And so there was, like Melin mentioned, I think the risks were not just evaluation project risks, but the risks of being misheard or unintentionally offending was a big one. So we wanted to make sure that we had guidance and support from those who had the knowledge and expertise who could help us navigate that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Hi, nice meeting you.
Great question.
Thanks for your question.
Juvena, there's another question from Amon Chen. On that note, following the same question as we've just dealt with, were Asian, Middle Eastern, Latin American, or African disabled learners within your sample?
Yes, there were. I don't know if Malin remembers this, but we had many cuts to our data, and we did look at across ethnicity as well as in our interviews. We tried to have as much of a representation of the diverse population. And yes, so we had interview participants as well as the data responses were filtered across those categories.
Thanks, Juvena. Now we've got a question from Mari. Mari, do go ahead with your question.
Kia ora. Kia ora, thank you so much for your presentation. It sounds like it was just such an extremely sensitive and well thought out process, and kind of from start to finish. The thing I want to ask about is, I guess, lessons learned. If you were to carry out this evaluation again, are there any things that you might do differently? And then also, I guess, I wonder if even throughout the process, you had lessons learned that you then implemented to the project going forward.
Really good question. So for our evaluation projects, we try and set up a lessons learned at the end of the project. And so we did that. But I think in terms of the ongoing journey, I think because of the way the project was set up and resourced in terms of 3 senior evaluators, Malin being the project lead who could do the timeline and delivery and risk management and sort of the reporting up of it. It wouldn't have worked had it not been 3 of us looking at different parts of the evaluation. There was a feedback loop because we were all working together, where we were informing each other. So if there was something that was a lesson learned with engagement with the sector, education sector, we could feed back into the other parts of the process. If there was something from engagement with the disabled community groups, as well as parents and whānau, or with the EAG, with academics who were giving us feedback, we could feed that back into the loop. So there was a feedback loop through the process, which I think helped mitigate the risks to a certain point. But I think it would be one of those projects where there were lessons learned along the way where we had to tweak a lot of the things as we went. But I think one of the biggest enablers for us to get this project to the finish was being able to partner and collaborate across at different levels within the evaluation. So not just at a sort of CE level partnership, but at a real working level partnership across agencies, which really enabled that to be a success. What would we do differently? I think building in more time for onboarding, for us to understand that it was actually quite a complex topic, and that can be quite sensitive, that can touch people in different ways. The fact that for some of those learners, it could have the potential of bringing up experiences that that needed mitigation, that needed support, so all of those were considerations that we had put in place, but putting in more time to do it right at the beginning of the project as a well thought through process would probably be the one thing that I'd go back and redo. But again, Tess and Maylene, feel free to jump in here for lessons learned and anything else that you want to add.
Kia ora koutou, Tess here. Just, I think one of the things that comes to mind most clearly was the wealth of data we ended up with, I think, in the end, because we spoke to so many stakeholders, you know, students and families, but and numerous ones within the education sector as well. So the challenge was doing justice to all that voice in at the end, and balancing, getting the right balance of the qualitative stories and the quantitative story, to get that together. So that was part of my memories of the. I think the other thing I was thinking about was just also the challenge of trying to bring out the nuance in the report of actually, we're not talking about disabled learners as a homogenous group, but they're actually incredibly diverse, and the complexities when you try to bring that nuance in and bring categories in to show that the different experiences that different groups were having, that was really complex as well. So yeah, lovely to be taking this chance to remember the process and to see the team again.
All right, thank you so much. I actually wondered, could I ask a follow-up? Is there time?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. And it does sound like there was so much kind of at the front end. And interesting that you say that it would be good to have even more. The follow-up, and I wonder if this is for Mylin on the project management side of things, but when you talk about feedback across the team and partnerships at different levels, what did that actually look like in form? Were there regular meetings with the partnering agencies? How did the team provide that feedback to each other?
Funny you should ask this. I now can't remember because but it seemed like lots of updates to the expert advisory group. Juvena might remember how frequent it was, but I felt that at the time when I was in the middle of it, that took up a lot of time. Not on the evaluation, but working. Not working in the evaluation, but on the evaluation took a more time than I think we even expected. The briefing, getting ready for what I call a bruising, like they were very robust. And then coming back and then recalibrating and adapting. And that's just the expert advisory group, and then there was a steering group as well. So yeah.
Every 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I think that seems like there's a little lull, and we've got other things to move on to, I'm sure. So I just want to thank Juvena again, personally and from you all, on behalf of you all. And there's people writing little comments in the chat, which we can look at later. So thank you very much for your feedback and your engagement in this. And we will put this recording up and the PowerPoint for you to be able to see online on the ANZEA website. And so please feel free to go and read more about that evaluation. You will see it's very easy to read. It's long, but there's some shorter versions, but the actual report itself is very engaging. And so please take time to look at that. Our next Kai Korero, we're hoping to look at setting up an ethics process, an internal ethics process, and with one of my colleagues again. So I hope that you'll join us for that. That will also be an interesting discussion, I'm sure. So we'll just finish with a karakia, which I have right here. I could even share it this time because I wasn't quite onto it last time, but maybe it's not come across. Can you share it? Can you see? Oh, don't worry.
We can see
it's
it.
because I haven't.
I can see it.
Can you?
Yeah.
Okay. Unihia ki te uru tapanui, kia wātea, kia mama, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua I te aratakata, koia rā I rongo, whakairia aki ki runga, kia tina, huie, tai kie. Kia ora. Lovely to see you all and have a great afternoon. Ka kite
Kia ora
ana.
koutou.
Yeah.